Coming up on This Week in Computer Hardware, AMD 3950X benchmark the new 16-inch MacBook Pro, Vulkan versus DX12 size, sweet new CPU cooler, and Flight Simulator 2020 builds. All that and more coming up next on TWiCH.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiCH.
This is TWiCH, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 541, recorded on November 14th, 2019. AMD 3950X benchmarks, MacBook Pro goes 16-inch, and the Razr is back. Welcome to TWiCH, This Week in Computer Hardware, TWiCH weekly show that brings you all the hardware news. And there is a ton of it this week, so we're going to get straight to it. PC Purr's editor-in-chief and benchmarking maven at large, Sebastian Peak, here as always, and shocking. And I will point out now, there may be more snark than one normally expects from Sebastian, which is terrifying. Because AMD's Ryzen 9 3950X reviews went live today, and he did not have a part. So tell me, sir.
Yeah.
Between the tears and that hiccuping thing you do when you're weeping.
I hit, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. I was in a bad place this morning. I slowly got through it, and with the help of some professional intervention, and
shovel and a bag of lime and a quick trip to someplace will remain unnamed. We joke, we kid, we do that. So 16 core, 32 threads, overclockable, not ridiculously priced, especially in the context of high performance processors we've seen in the last few years. What's the story?
Well, the first thing I noticed, and I'm looking at the Tom's Hardware review, and this was testing done by Paul Alcorn over there. Basically, going into this, we knew it was going to be faster, and anything that could take advantage of those extra cores. And it's actually slightly faster as far as frequency. Single core frequency is 100 megahertz faster than the 3900X, which was probably the most impressive thing to me. They were highly binning these Zen 2 parts to get not only one with 16 working cores, but 16 cores that would hit 4.7 gigahertz instead of 4.6 on a single core boost, and then also meet their sort of TDP target. And what's interesting about this, there's a couple of things going on here, and I'm getting way ahead of myself here. One is that it not only is hitting 4.7, and we talked about this in the past, that there were problems with Ryzen not hitting its advertised frequencies, and AMD had to sort of clarify and said that was a best case scenario. They were very specific with reviewers in saying they recommended at least a cooler of the caliber of an H115i or greater. That's a 280 millimeter all-in-one liquid cooler from Corsair. I don't know if they were sending those out with the press kits, but that's what their recommendation was. Either a 280 or a 360 all-in-one liquid cooler. So right off the bat, reviewers were using much better cooling than the in-box solution with the 3900X. And then Tom's Hardware was reporting boost clocks of actually up to 4.75 gigahertz on single core with the latest firmware, everything running on a new X570 motherboard, which is obviously better than advertised. Nate at Legit Reviews, I saw him on Twitter this morning saying that he was getting slightly above 4.7 gigahertz single core. So did a really great job bending these to get higher performance, in addition to the fact you're still getting 4 cores and therefore 8 additional threads. So the kind of flip side of this that was very interesting is power consumption is down versus the 3900X. So it looks like this hyper binning process has resulted in this like the ideal processor, essentially. It's lower power consumption, more cores, more threads, higher boost clocks. So if you were holding out and hadn't bought one of these Ryzen 3000 series processors yet, if you can find one of these and you can afford the $750 price tag, this is the ultimate Ryzen processor. It's going to consume less power, offer higher clock speeds. And then while the caveat about gaming performance, if the game is, and of course this is an Intel talking point, this is not me, but Intel points out the the latency that they have an advantage with, memory latency, out of order instructions, things that Intel's architecture is better at, that results in better performance in gaming most of the time. If the game is more CPU bound, such as like a Civilization 6 test, you'll see a more of an advantage on AMD's side.
Right.
A lot of the other games were still going to like the first several places on every chart. You'll see an Intel processor, which is what I was seeing with the 3900X. Civilization's like one story, and then you go into things like Far Cry and other games tested, and you'll see more of an advantage for just those higher single clock speeds that Intel enjoys. So, something like the 9900K and KS, those are boosting it at 5 gigahertz single core, and in the case of the KS, 5 gigahertz all core. So anything that relies on IPC advantage is probably still going to see Intel on top. It kind of goes back and forth, and you can look through the reviews that are online, but it's basically the same story, and it's far more impressive, though, than the 9900K versus the KS. That was, like you called it, kind of meh. It was a little bit faster because you're boosting the same processor, you're boosting it a little bit faster on all cores instead of being limited to like 2 cores boosting at 5 gigahertz. But this is faster single-threaded performance. Like Cinebench is up to like 529 single core from 520, 521, which actually puts it out ahead of Intel. That's the one benchmark that they love to point to because they do really well. I don't know if it favors AMD, but they have been winning Cinebench. If anybody uses that beyond just benchmarking, the actual the rendering engine, but it's super impressive. The biggest concern I have about this is just going to be availability. Right. And comparing this to the upcoming Threadripper, which I don't think anybody has yet, but Threadripper comes out on the 24th or 25th, and it's going to require an entirely new platform. You're going to have to buy into a new socket, essentially, even though it's physically the same. But you can't just drop it into an existing board. The 3950X, you can drop it into a 300 series, 400 series, or 500 series board, update your BIOS all the way first, and it's just going to work. So, while there's skepticism about the viability of putting a 3950X into an old like 370 board, I personally don't think it's as much of an issue because, it's PCI Express 4.0 is not going to work. They've disabled that with, several versions back with the firmware updates. But if you have decent power delivery, this is not like a 280 watt processor. It's a 105 watt processor. Yeah, it consumes more than that under an all-core load, but it still doesn't have the crazy power requirements that we've seen from some other high-end desktop parts. And I feel like this is the high-end desktop sweet spot, really. We haven't seen Threadripper performance yet, no. But Threadripper starts at $1,400, $1,399 and $1,999. So I look at this. It's $749. Save the money. Buy an X470 board. You don't even need an X570 board unless you want PCIe 4. And, it's...
Which is more future-proofing than actually useful right now.
Exactly. You can my straight line speeds are so much faster with this PCIe 4 SSD, but it's exactly the same performance, like actually opening up applications and just doing everyday computing tasks. So,
you could add more. I'm just thinking of like more memory, more storage. There's so many other places you could put that additional giant pile of cache. I'm excited. I'm kind of shocked by the power. Or the lack of massive power consumption. Now, if I could just find a sub 42 millimeter fan or cooler that'll pull 105 watts legitimately, but still, it's time
to go custom loop. If you have those kind of height requirements, you're just going to have to do an all-in-one liquid cooler or a custom liquid cooling solution, I think.
Problem is that then I'd have to put a box outside of the box, but that's a conversation for another day.
It's hide it behind a curtain.
Something that's no longer hidden behind a curtain. Motorola is releasing a new Razr, and this is This is funny. Everyone owned a Razr phone. Razr phones were hot. They were hip. They were folding phones. And kind of out of nowhere, at least for me, Motorola has announced their pocket-sized ready flip phone. Look, kids, it's got a screen. And I was actually kind of really excited about this until I saw the price. So it is a full folding screen, and it is the least expensive folding screen phone we've seen. But it's still $1,500, so it's not inexpensive. Yeah. But they're taking pre-orders. Verizon's going to release the phone in January, they claim. Of course, we've seen the Samsung Galaxy Fold get released and then pulled back, and then all the pre-orders were canceled. Huawei's Mate X, I think, is still unlaunched. And the folding phone has been kind of a non-starter. This is an interesting idea, right? It takes that basic idea of a thicker base, a thinner top, and they put a full-on 6.2-inch display on it. And when it's unfolded, and it's an interesting play for Motorola, right? Motorola, they kind of basically the Razr came out. It was the hottest phone on the planet in like 2005, in part because they 2005, 2006, because they put bags of them. They put them in bags at the Academy Awards, right? And 2 years later, 2007, the iPhone comes out, wipes pretty much everybody off the phone map, and dumb phones kind of disappeared. Of course, we then subsequently have iPhones, Android phones, and Motorola goes from being like literally the premier leader and technology kind of authority, and actually they did a lot of really decent design work too. They turn around, they just basically disappear. They get bought by Google. Google mines them to sort of start their own first pure Android phones, and then eventually they continue to bleed money and they get sold to Lenovo. Lenovo has a ton of expertise in the yoga group, the laptop group, and a lot of hinge expertise. They've done some incredibly sophisticated hinges on laptops in the last few years. So this is an interesting play for Motorola, in part to kind of regain some of that, like, we make cool phones too. Because there's a nice article on CNET that kind of points out, this thing's like 5 times as expensive as sort of Motorola's bread and butter, which would be like a Motorola G7 right now, a Moto G7, which is a really nice phone, amazing phone for the money. But Motorola only has about 3% of the handset market, CNET writes. And this is an interesting effort to try to make a splash. It's retro. It looks incredibly, convenience. I don't know. I'm curious about this. As someone who could give a rat's ass about phones getting thinner, this seems functional in some interesting ways. So they claim they have the hinge sorted out. I
don't doubt the hinge being sorted out. I'm just worried about the screen. I don't know why they don't consult me about. Actually, I do know why they don't consult me about these things. So they don't know that I exist or necessarily care. But first of all, I think this is the best idea for a flip out device. We talked about that Microsoft device, and that's great too. And it's especially great because it's 2 separate screens, and at that point, as long as the hinge is designed well, you're not going to have any issues with the device when it's folded. And like you said, like if it's not about having the thinnest device, then you don't have to worry so much about having a stronger hinge and having a bigger battery. I think this is perfect though. Like the large phones that are prevalent, like 6+ inch devices that people carry around, this is a commonplace thing now. It seems kind of ridiculous that you'd need to then open that up to be double the width. Seems kind of ungainly. Like, how are you going to use this? A lot of people use their phone with one hand, and it's about thumb reach. But
well, apparently they think everybody wants a bigger screen to watch their YouTube videos on. I mean, that's literally kind of something that we've seen cited. I mean, this is an interesting idea, right? Because of the way it makes it more usable. CNET's article, the Motorola's foldable Razr inside the remaking of a flip phone icon. They have an interesting conversation with Tom Gitzinger, which is he's kind of like the man, the person, principal engineer of innovation and architecture for Motorola. So that display panel they put together has 5 layers. One of them is made of stainless steel. It's only 360 microns thick. they used their scatter shield display or something similar to that plastic scatter shield display. That was the one they had to take a pickaxe to put a hole into it. I think it was on a Droid 2 or a Turbo 2. Probably not something a lot of us are familiar with, either using pickaxes against phones or the phone in question. But they put steel plates behind the display where it bends, and the idea is it's actually going to straighten out any creases. And because they weren't going for ultra thin, they gave them space to create a gap. So they say that the screen folds in a teardrop shape rather than a U or a flat line. And it looks like they may have actually thought about or actually, here's a direct quote from Mr. Gitzinger. We looked at the ways this could fail and would account for it. So I'm very curious about this one, right? Because in theory, they might have sort of an outer screen on this, like a 3-inch screen, and to get your notifications on, there's like a 16 megapixel camera designed into that. I'm really kind of curious, right? Because that secondary screen means you will be able to, use the phone, take selfies, do a bunch of other stuff without actually opening the phone. So I'm super curious about this. And CNET notes in the article that Samsung apparently showed off, quote, a mock-up of a horizontally folding fold at its annual developer conference last month. And TCL showed off prototypes of foldable flip phones while at Mobile World Congress, end quote. So I'm super curious about this. Really nice read over on CNET.com that Roger Cheng put together. Not Roger Chang, Cheng with an E. And I'm kind of curious. I want him to ship on time. That's all I want.
Yeah, look at this. If you're watching the video, that picture is absolutely perfect. And I wasn't making myself very clear before, but I feel like if you have it's kind of a chunky, wider version of the Razr, first of all, but when you open it up, it's pretty much just a standard smartphone size. It's like that tall, narrow, like wider than 16 by 9, like 21 by 9 kind of phone concept that we're used to with like a Samsung device. And then you fold it back up and put it in your pocket. As long as that screen will withstand being opened and closed constantly, it's great. I like the unbroken look. I would be personally fine with it being two separate screens instead of the old school physical number, like a T9 pad on the bottom and a screen up top, have two screens with a border in between. I could live with that, but I get what they're doing here. It makes way more sense to me to try that concept out than to say, here's your 6-inch smartphone, open it up, and now it's 12 inches. And it's just kind of this huge square thing you're holding, and it's very fragile, and it's $2,000. So, but still, 15 is still way too much for this. If this was like $7.99, you could buy it on like your phone plan and pay $30 a month. So people would actually be more interested. I would be interested. I would switch to this Razr if it was like the same price of an iPhone 11.
Well, at least they're in the neighborhood. They're not twice the cost of an iPhone 11. For whatever that's worth.
Anyway, yeah.
Okay. Well, it's closer than other folding phones.
Very much so.
Closer than the other folding phone that's mostly shipping.
Is it shipping? I mean, you can go buy it at like a Best Buy, I guess. So I guess it is shipping.
I guess. Oh my goodness. RAM is cheap right now, but Samsung might be fixing that. In a really painful way, actually. Fab contamination has ruined hundreds of millions of DRAM wafers. This is funny because the article comes on a report on computerbase.de. If your German is rusty, and it probably is if it's like mine. Essentially, they've claimed several billion yuan, which actually works out to a billion yuan is like $800,000 US. So it would have to be a lot of billions. It would have to be many billions of wons to be hundreds of millions of dollars. But some of the articles on this reporting like 100 million to 500 billion in losses. And something I thought was interesting, if you translate that computer-based article, it notes that TSMC had issues a few months ago. Quote, the use of chemicals deviating from specification actually damaged a whole bunch of wafers. And if you don't remember what a wafer is, essentially when you grow a chip, you grow a big, giant, flat silicon wafer, and all the individual chips are grown on that. And so when you lose one of those 200 millimeter wafers, you lose a lot of memory chips. So if you're thinking about buying memory, you might want to buy it now. That said, I don't think this is going to impact memory prices that much. Unless it continues to be an issue. It's hard to tell like what the actual volume coming out of this factory is and how that'll impact, the global market for memory. But we know that there's a lot more memory than there is people buying it because the prices have dropped so much in the last year and a half.
Yeah, and the estimates from that are all over the map too. These are the smaller 200 millimeter wafers. U.S. dollars, we're talking anywhere between reports of 170 million to reports of up to $550 million in losses. So you'd have to think at some point that would affect pricing, but I hope not. And I'm not sure what they actually do produce on 200 millimeter wafers versus 300.
Right. So much information, yet not enough to figure out how this is going to impact my ability to buy RAM later this year. During Fireball,
can we talk about the announcement of the week? Forget Ryzen, Patrick. Didn't Apple come out with a all new, I quote, all new. Here's where we get snarky. The all new MacBook Pro 16, which isn't actually all new, but I'll sorry for interrupting.
You'll snark on that in a moment. So during Fireball, one of the chosen few that receives early Macintosh products to review, this is like a list of 4 or 5 people, has a great, I will call it harsh, take on the new 16-inch Mac Pro. Quote, while the keyboard's de-Joni-ivification is good, we shouldn't be celebrating the return of features we shouldn't have lost. What are we talking about here? Well, the stupid keyboard layout changes. And one of the things that Daring Fireball talks about is there was a lot of indications that many things were being done because they were pleasing aesthetically, even if they made things enormously difficult to use. For example, the keyboards that kept failing. But now with the 16-inch MacBook Pro, arrow keys are back in a T layout. There's additional spacing on the keyboard. The keyboard design has been changed to something that actually works. Haha. And doesn't require repair, constant. But this is an actual scissor key mechanism keyboard, no butterfly switches, and there's a hardware escape key, which I think is a big deal on any Apple device. And this is good. A little bit thicker than the 15-inch models. But oddly enough, and I think this is where you'll start snarking, using pretty much the exact same processors. During Fireball notes that, quote, the new 16-inch MacBook Pro is not covered by Apple's keyboard service program because they apparently don't need to be. We wait with bated breath to find out if that's true. These are, as always, MacBook Pros are not inexpensive laptops. It's like $2,400 for a 6-core base model, $2,800 for the 8-core base model. But these, again, the same CPUs that came out in the May update to the 15-inch MacBook Pro. But you're also talking about they've got AMD Radeon Pro 5000 M series GPUs as an option. You can get up to 64 gigabytes of RAM in one of these, which is epic, especially if you're a video editor. And you can max it out with an 8 terabyte SSD if you want to cut the check.
Is there any 8 terabyte SSD that exists?
Rumor has it
Express
they are the
SSDs.
first one.
Yeah, and it's soldered directly to the board, which is also nuts. So,
well, a lot of storage is soldered to the board on a lot of laptops.
I'm just saying, that kind of density, there's either 4 or 8 chips soldered to the board, right, and they're getting 8 terabytes. So they're using really dense NAND flash there, an integrated controller. Yeah. So that's going to be the most expensive logic board in the history of Apple, I bet.
Well, it's basically the entire computer and everything on it. Yeah. And apparently the speakers are pretty fantastic too, if you plan to be using your 2500 to God knows how much laptop to listen to YouTube videos. They should be good.
And honestly, okay, to be fair, $2,400 for a professional grade, like portable workstation is not outrageous. Right. If you're a consumer, that looks insane. But like
for a
portable
pro,
workstation,
it's quite reasonable.
Yeah, right. You're buying the 16-inch screen that's, ultra high quality, beautiful color, full Adobe color gamut, P3 color, all that stuff, and it's got.
And they increased they increased the pixel density in this one. So they go from the 15-inch to the 16-inch. They actually made the pixels smaller and increased the pixel density on this, which I think is awesome.
Yeah.
So,
which means
the screens on these are absolutely gorgeous. Better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just think it's funny that the Magic Keyboard, which I'm looking up here, Apple launched on October 13, 2015, is now incorporated into their MacBook Pro. With its and by the way, if you haven't used one, even if you hate Apple products, try using one of their Magic Keyboards. Any of them you can get your hands on. They have this 1mm key travel that's crisp, has a little bit of a click to it, and I got used to it quickly when I was using one. And you can type really fast in those things, and it feels really accurate. I think they're great, but
there's nothing wrong with them.
No, and amazingly, their scissor switch mechanism is fairly robust, and except for committing the cardinal sin of having 1mm of key travel and therefore requiring that extra millimeter of space, they I don't know, like they had to make everything as thin and miraculous as possible, I guess, before. And there was this obsession with getting away from physical keys completely, I think was the goal. But
getting away from keyboards.
Yeah, I mean, just you need two touchpads, right? That's always going to work.
And a pen. So Johnny can draw.
Except the iPad Pro has a touch screen and a pen, and the MacBook Pro doesn't have a touch screen and can't use the pen. But it's kind of a weird thing. It's like a Franken Mac. It's like a fan developed this, and Apple said, "All right, we'll make it. We'll use 2015 keyboard. We'll give you the screen density you're asking for." But then the funny thing is, this is reality, and Intel still hasn't delivered 10 nanometer to the masses, and so there are no 10 nanometer parts in these things, which you'd think the absolute newest, and like this will be called the late 2019 MacBook Pro 16. And it's using an 8th or 9th gen part. It's all still based on Skylake. You're not getting the hardware benefits of 10th generation. So,
it is what it is. The nice thing about this is there's enough other things that are positives on this laptop that I'm less concerned about the CPU. ... It would be nice to have more CPU power. The other kind of thing that came out of the Apple camp this week was an actual ship date. Well, a updated shipping-ish date for the Mac Pro and Pro Display XDR. They will ship in December. These were announced in June, supposed to ship in the fall. It's actually, if you're into it, it's a gorgeous case. It looks like a little tiny skyscraper made out of, aluminum and stainless filigree. Hefty price tags on these, as you would expect. 28 core, 2.5 gigahertz Intel Xeon W. If you max it out, there's 6 channels of ECC memory. There's 12 actual DIMM slots, 8 PCI slots. This is one. Apple definitely got the message about not having to use cables to put everything outside your machine to clutter up your desk that way, and which is a big plus. And the cooling looks interesting. The layout looks interesting. The Pro Display XDR is just as expensive as we remember from this summer. The base version is $5,000. If you opt for the nano texture matte screen, you add a healthy $1,000 to that to bring up the price to $6,000. Again, these are professional systems. These are workstations. These are at the high end. These are for people who, make their living staring at pixels and doing things with them. But there are some pre-order options up on Apple's website now. And let me see if I can pull. Yeah, it's funny. It still says Mac Pro coming this fall. I actually really like the case design on this. I also love the ridiculous cooler design. And when I say ridiculous, I mean over the top in a positive way. So, and by the way, those 12 DIMM slots, you can stuff up to 1.5 terabytes of memory into this, should you be able to cut that check. I just like the idea of having 1.5 terabytes of memory. Makes me happy. Vulcan versus DirectX 12 on Red Dead. Kit Guru did a really nice, really interesting write-up on this. What happened when you move Red Dead Redemption from Vulcan to DX12? Does life get better? Do angels sing? Or was there weeping and rending of garments?
See, normally, anytime there's a game that supports Vulkan, you expect it to offer better performance than DirectX because there's probably been optimizations done. But in general, Vulkan is a more efficient API. And this is, again, the case. Higher average frame rates across the board. Different graphics cards. They were using a 5700 XT from AMD and a 2070 Super from NVIDIA. And you see slightly higher frames per second with Vulkan versus DX12. However, the consistency of the frame rate was far worse with Vulkan in every test. So that 99th percentile, those slow frames that spike up and you have visible stuttering on the screen, it goes way down. Like the one example up on the screen right now is the 1080p high settings. So just kind of exactly where the average mid to high range gaming setup would probably be playing the game. And it goes from 85.7 FPS to 90.4 when you switch over to Vulkan. But that 99th percentile goes from 67.5 down to 58.2. So and it's across the board. At every resolution, they saw a drop in overall smoothness, basically. So I feel like this could be a game engine update away from not being the case. And you have to wonder, and it's nice that they did do both platforms on current drivers. Right. So if there are improved drivers from AMD and NVIDIA that address this, great. But it almost seems like if it's both platforms, it's got to be game engine related. So we will see. But I mean, some of the drops were pretty big, like 10, 12, 20 FPS for that 99th percentile on Vulkan. So generally the opposite.
That's a big drop.
Like if you have a game that supports Vulkan, you almost always see better performance, like across the board, like 95th, 99th percentile. But just another always rocky. Plus. Yeah, there's those little bullet points with the RD, the Red Dead Redemption 2. I can't remember the acronym everywhere is RDR2. Every story I read and everyone talking about this game uses that acronym, and I read it as R2D2 every time. So, that's my problem. It's been a rocky start for this game.
Just, Disney Plus is here. We'll talk about that in a second. Just
okay.
Go watch The Mandalorian. You'll feel better.
Everything's fine.
Oculus CTO John Carmack to step down, which was, oddly enough, a headline in Variety, the legendary Hollywood, news sheet of record. Wednesday he's going to be a consulting CTO, and is going to be, quote, devoting most of his time to new challenges outside the company. I will still have a voice in the development work, but it will only be consuming a modest slice of my time, Carmack wrote in a Facebook post, not approach. And he's going to be working on artificial general intelligence and not at Facebook. So I also, what was really fascinating as part of this Facebook quote, for the time being, at least, or this Facebook post, he writes, for the time being, at least, I'm going to be going about it Victorian gentleman scientist style, pursuing my inquiries from home and drafting my son into the work. So Oculus says they're glad he's still on board, but I am curious about this one because I wonder if does he feel the problems are solved? Does he feel that they want to move in directions he doesn't? Does he feel that VR is kind of played out and his considerable intellectual talents are better cornered at or better directed at artificial intelligence, obviously. But it's also amazing to realize, right? He joined Oculus in 2013 and has been there, for like 6 years. So, it's also several months after, the last of the co-founders, Nate Mitchell, decided to leave. I don't know. Yeah, it seems like all the leadership from Oculus is pretty much gone at this point. And I'm curious what that means for the future of the Oculus platform. And I'm also kind of curious what's going on with VR in general, because we seem to be in sort of a lull, because a whole bunch of products have been released. A bunch of them do really good things. And a lot of because the questions about this have kind of fallen off the map. So maybe I shouldn't be spending so much time talking about this. But I'm kind of curious if he feels his job is done, or if he feels that there's just no longer an impact he can make here compared to working in artificial intelligence. But good luck, Mr. Carmack. We know you do cool stuff.
You know what VR needs, Carmack. Patrick?
What's VR need?
It needs Nintendo. We need Virtual Boy too. You know, they didn't get it right the first time. They were limited by technology. It wasn't a big success at all. And I don't think gamers really love, all the retro love we've had recently, the NES Classic and the SNES Classic, the new one that just came out from Sega, their first party classic console, and the TurboGrafx 16 Classic is coming, and all these other classic consoles. No love for the old Virtual Boy? I mean, how easily could you just make that a cardboard headset and use your phone and recreate the
cardboard's dead? It's been open source. We talked about that last week.
Okay, so I'm just saying, it was all red. That was kind of a problem. There weren't a lot of games for it, and even fewer.
I think that was the bigger problem.
I think the ridiculous setup too didn't help. It was a headset, but you didn't actually strap it to your head. You leaned into it, and then you had a controller. And but if Nintendo can do color 3D VR stuff, I don't know, maybe it'll be interesting enough. Although I will say the 3DS never really got into that either. I played 3DS games in 2D mode, and I was very happy when they came out with the 2DS. So,
right.
Kind of not what they're. Oh. That's not really the target for VR, though, I guess.
Mostly, I want to know is Disney Plus going to come to the Oculus?
Why? So you can sit in a virtual living room watching TV?
No, the Oculus Go. I realized, a friend of mine at a point. I was in a hotel recently having a horrible experience with their 42-inch vintage, dated, antique, mostly HD TV, and I realized a friend of mine's comment that the Oculus Go really is a fantastic way to watch movies, and his suggestion was, because they have the sort of speakers that go over your ears rather than in-ear or over-ear audio. And his thing was you learn how to wedge yourself in between the pillows so that the noise from your movie or whatever you're doing doesn't bother your spouse. But I'm also a little Disney Plus obsessed this week for obvious reasons. Scythe Fuma 2 CPU cooler, reverse jet flow power. I can't decide if this is hype in search of something interesting or something interesting with a slightly hypey name. But I love sort of the opening deck from your article, from your review. 2 towers, 2 fans, 2 directions? ? Yeah. Scythe makes some really good coolers, so I shouldn't be too obnoxious. But this is we've never seen this configuration for a cooler before, and the question is that because it doesn't work?
I admit, when I got this, it just sounds kind of like marketing, and you look at it, it's another a dual tower cooler, 2 fans, nothing special. Although I noticed right away, I don't know if you've picked up on this, but the second fan is really, really slim. There's a standard 25 millimeter fan that sits in the middle of the 2 heatsink towers. And then on the end, by the memory, there's a really skinny 15 millimeter fan. And what's interesting about this design is one fan is spinning clockwise, and the other fan is spinning counterclockwise. They're both blowing air in the same direction, but they're spinning in 2 opposite directions. And this is supposed to create this, I'm trying to think, what are they actually, is this like a vortex effect? It's basically, they say that this reverse airflow concept produces 15% more cooling performance compared to their previous version of this. So I put this on the old cooler test bench I've been using for about 2.5 years. So I've got some data to compare this against. And the results were so surprising to me that it makes me want to retest everything, even though I did retest all of these coolers within the last 8 months on this exact platform.
Right.
So the Fuma 2, which bear in mind, this is a $59 cooler, beat out the Be Quiet Dark Rock Pro 4 and coolers like the Hyper 212 Evo, the newer Hyper 212 RGB Black Edition, which is a really good cooler. It beat out the Dark Rock coolers, which, admittedly, this test is not the most strenuous test, though. I'm using the X264 benchmark. It's not pegging all cores all the time like something like Cinebench would. So when I switched over to Cinebench, as kind of a footnote here, I had above ambient temps of 54.6 degrees, and that compares to the Dark Rock Pro 4 at 57.9. So this is still a full 3 degrees cooler than this giant, like $90 Be Quiet Dark Rock Pro 4 cooler. I need to test some Noctua stuff. I've got a D14. I need to test on some more demanding CPUs in the Core i7-7700K, which is a very, very hot CPU. And it's very easy to push that up to 100 degrees if you're not being careful. But still, I mean, I haven't tested this with a 9900K or with a Ryzen 3900X. And when I saw these results, I was thinking this is going to be kind of a middle-of-the-road cooler, befitting its price tag, because you would expect it to perform better than a $40 cooler. It's not going to be able to compete with the deluxe dual-tower models, and it absolutely does. So it was kind of amazing to me. But it does come at a bit of the expensive noise, slightly. I mean, it depends on if you consider 35 to 36 decibels loud. It's noticeable. It's absolutely not loud. It's just I've gotten so used to these coolers that spin like 800 to 1200 RPM max,
right? And
you can barely hear them. And I was only recording 1200 RPMs. Actually, it was between literally 1178 and like 1202. So they were right on with their speed with both fans. But something about this heatsink design and that opposite, like the fans spinning in opposite directions, their reverse jet flow, seemed to create a little bit more noise, just air turbulence noise.
I mean, it's also, when you look at, when you look at the cooler noise charts, right? You're still talking like 33 to 35 dB for the majority of these, and you bump up like a couple of Cooler Masters are up at 32 to 38. It's not bad. I wish the Delta, and it's always interesting when we look at cooler. I look at this, it's like, wow, this is 2 degrees or almost not quite, 1.7 degrees cooler than 1.7 to 1.9 degrees cooler than the next like 2 or 3 coolers on here. And then it's like, does that extra degree make much of a difference? Maybe, maybe not. But in any case, it's a reminder that just about any decent aftermarket cooler makes a huge difference compared to the Intel stock cooler that's probably bundled on your processor if it came from the factory, which is like 83 degrees Celsius versus 48 to 53 degrees Celsius for all the aftermarket coolers that Sebastian tested. So you can pay a lot of money and get basically the same performance, or you can pay less money and basically get the same performance. But please, especially if you want to overclock, replace that stock Intel cooler.
That's what's great about the Scythe stuff too, is because for around $50 to $60, you can get something that performs as well as anything. And that's been the case for a few years. The Ninja 4 I reviewed a few years ago, which kind of blew me away because it was cheaper, but the same performance is like a big knock to a cooler. But the one thing I was going to point out is I need to go back and kind of check this. I have this theory going now that ambient temperatures, and this seems like common sense. Of course, ambient temperatures affect cooling performance, but I only measure things in deltas, like the difference between the ambient temp and the load temperature is what you're getting on these charts. But it seems like there might be a relationship between a lower ambient temperature and the overall effectiveness of an air cooler, maybe because it just never reaches that state where it can no longer cope with a particular temperature. So that may have affected the results as well, because I just tested this a couple nights ago, and it's significantly colder. It just got really cold. It's like 5-6 degrees colder in this room than it was this summer, like in late August when I was testing coolers. So that could have an effect.
There you have it. We got a viewer question from Jeffrey, who writes, "Hello, guys. The new Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 is in the works. Not sure when or how much, but it looks fantastic. With your contacts, maybe you could find out. Trust me, they're not telling anybody. It's done when it's done." And he's got a Asus Z97 Pro with a Core i7 4770K, 16 gigs of RAM, and an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 970. Do you think I need to build another PC or upgrade this one? I really think RAM prices have dropped since the last I looked. Where's the best place to buy it these days? Thanks for any help. Love the show, Jeffrey. So if you go to flightsimulator.com, there is media, and the screenshots are amazing, which is not entirely surprising, right? The original Flight Sim came out in 2006. Flight Simulator 2020 shown off at E3 this year. It's the first major update to Flight Simulator in 13 years. It basically makes it 3D in a really big way. Full-on 3D rendered, whole new flight and game engine, volumetric clouds, 3D rain, all kinds of lighting effects that just didn't exist back in the day. It looks stunning. All the video of it looks absolutely amazing. And it's supposed to be released on Xbox after it debuts on the PC, which suggests a certain friendliness to older systems. That said, nobody has any information on the minimum specs. They've literally just started testing with alpha reviewers at flightsimulator.com, which is the website. You should sign up for that if you want to try to get early access to it. Your 970 GPU, Jeffrey, which came out in 2014, and that 4770 CPU, they're a little long in the tooth, but it's actually a really solid combo. That GPU is still like 62nd on the GPU user benchmarks list. It's slower than a 1070, but not as much as you think. Like, to get a 50 to 100% performance bump in frame rates, you need to go to something like a 2070, which is a pretty freaking big jump. That said, we've got CES, possibly another GDC and E3 between now and the release of Flight Simulator 2020, which was announced at E3 this summer. And we have no idea how many GPUs are going to be released, but I suggest it will be more than one and possibly a half dozen at the rate they've been going. So I would say sit on your current system until the game is released, test it, and then decide if it's time for a new GPU or CPU. You had some thoughts on this too, Sebastian.
Yeah, because that's such a good combo, like you said. The 4th generation Core and GTX 900 series GPU is kind of like a modern classic combo. And if you go too high in the GPU, then you're going to run into CPU bottlenecking issues. But you're absolutely not constrained in either way with that combo. Your CPU is not holding that GPU back, right? And the GPU isn't CPU bound. If you were to move up to like an RTX 2060 or something, then you might experience some, the performance might be held back a little bit because that Haswell part is a little old. If you moved up to Skylake, you wouldn't see that, I don't think. So if you did like 6th gen plus RTX 20 series, I think that's when you kind of catch back up again. Or one of the Ryzen parts. Like if you go Zen Core, I would say Zen 2. So get like a 3600, a Ryzen 5 3600 for $200. And pair that with like an RTX 2060 or an RX 5700. But, that's where I think your biggest impact is going to be, is if you actually, and that, of course, involves a platform upgrade as well. So you'd be moving from, why am I forgetting this? With Haswell, you were still on DDR3. So you'd actually have to buy a new motherboard, new memory, new processor, and a new graphics card. So that's a huge commitment just to play one game. Although, if you want to play a higher detail settings, bigger resolutions, you're going to have to upgrade the whole system, unfortunately, at this point. But 1080 high
is
yeah,
what it is.
1080 high, I think the 970 would still be able to handle that just fine. But we'll see.
It would be nice. It would be pleasing, to say the least.
I just thought of this. You have Flight Simulator, which is amazing and beautiful. And I was thinking that Flight Simulator could be the perfect vehicle to drive VR. We were just talking about VR. How amazing
it would be.
Just able to look out the window and the scenery is changing in real time out of your VR headset. But it reminded me of a game, I guess you could call it a game, an experience app. It's on Steam. I just put the link in next to your Flight Sim link. It's, you must look at this. It's called Airplane Mode. And it literally is, it simulates the experience of flying in coach on a across Atlantic flight. So you just you get to sit in your seat and just, you've got a phone in airplane mode. It's almost out of battery power, crappy in-flight entertainment. Just the experience of sitting in a coach seat for like 6 hours. That's the entire game.
This is right up there with Penn and Teller's Smoke and Mirrors Desert Bus game, which...
See, what your carry-on bag includes a book, headphones, a pen, and a charging cable. See, I wonder if... Now, does your seat have a USB charging port? That's going to be the big question. Because then you're going to be stuck with the in-flight entertainment system, which has 1930s films and a flight tracker. So, you can read a magazine. They have one of the in-flight magazines there, which has articles, crossword puzzles, and Sudoku as well. So,
goodness, that's still, yeah. That's just horrifying.
As somebody who's flown a long way in coach, it's too close to home. It's uncomfortable to even think about trying.
Too soon. Man, another Jeff emailed Twitch at twit.tv looking for 1 terabyte SATA 3 SSD compatible with my Asus P8 C77 motherboard. Have any suggestions? Yeah, actually. It's a pretty easy choice for you because your motherboard's got SATA 6 gigabit per second ports. And right now, the sweet spot for me on those would be a Crucial MX500. 1 terabyte is going to cost you a whopping $107, or a Samsung 860. Again, 1 terabyte is going to cost you a whopping $110. This is as good as it's going to get. You don't have any NVMe or M.2 options unless I completely misread the specs on that motherboard. And that, of course, makes shopping simpler. You get a 2.5-inch drive enclosure with SATA connections on there. And I'm loving it. So close. They could just knock another $7 on the price of that Crucial. We would be in Shroud territory at the 10 cents per gigabyte.
Ryan's Law, yes.
So close.
SSDs shall be 10 cents per gigabyte and can be as long as you have an M.2 slot. But that's the funny thing. M.2 is actually cheaper than SATA now. So you can get one of those 1 terabyte Intel QLC and I think around $89 most of the time. And I'm sure we'll see crazy sales like the whole Black Friday thing and Cyber Monday.
Sub-Shroudian SSD prices. There's nothing wrong with that.
Alinian SSD prices. That's the sub-shroud.
Oh, my goodness. Roy emailed a suggestion. Oh, by the way, if you're wondering the best way to contact us, do us a favor, email us twitch@twit.tv. And you'll notice we like answering your questions. We do it as often as we can. So send them in, Twitch, TWiCH@twit.tv. Roy's got a suggestion for my mobile internet mayhem. Just emailed Mo5 4500-4GXE LTE-SIM4. And Googling that, turns out the Mofi 4500 4GXE LTE-SIM4, and it's a combination 4G LTE router, compatible with AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, and it's basically a metal box, looks kind of like a router. You can screw it into the wall or the wall of your RV. Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, LTE2, LTE, compatible modem, AT&T, and it's includes like two cellular antennas and two Wi-Fi antennas, or possibly 4 Wi-Fi antennas, because this is one of those products where the specs seem to change as you're reading the article. That is so it's pretty slick. It's a router. It's got lots of antennas. It's got a SIM module, and I am super curious about this, in part because the reviews on Amazon are pretty solid. Some reviewers who have been writing about this, or end users who have been writing about this, have found some challenges in the firmware and the administration on it. But essentially, you're talking about a very similar device to the box I got from Togo, and I bought that box, that particular configuration, because there was a quote unlimited unquote AT&T account associated with that. Which would be much nicer if AT&T actually worked in the particular area where the Airstream is parked right now, where it looks like there's AT&T coverage, but there is none, which is one of the games you play with mobile internet. But yeah, I thought this is interesting, and I've seen people using similar devices to this with. There's basically an external Yagi antenna you could bolt onto this to try to give you improved performance when reaching out to a cell tower. This is interesting, and I am very curious about this. I'm going to play around with one of these so I can get a hold of one, swapping SIMs into them, see what that does for performance. So, Roy, thank you for the heads up. If I look terrified, it's because a helicopter just flew over about 25 yards above where I'm sitting right now, which is,
you look suspicious sitting there,
way lower than they usually fly over. So I wanted to wrap up this week's. I want to wrap up. I'm going to talk about the earbuds that changed my mind about true wireless earbuds, which is Cambridge Audio's Melomania 1, and I love these things. They may be a little tiny bit more bass than I particularly want out of an in-ear, but ridiculous battery life, really, really small case that has a decent boost charge on this. But I was so shocked that Cambridge Audio did wireless earbuds. I actually went out and bought a set online even before their PR team reached out to me. And they're about $130. And they are quite good. I was actually shocked at how good. Like they're all I listened to for like 2 weeks. Bluetooth 5.0. They've got a whole bunch of processing they don't really do anything with. They're using a Qualcomm, basically a Qualcomm chip system kind of thing, right? It's a QCC 3026 single core, 120 megahertz Kalimba DSP audio subsystem. But essentially, they're just using that to power the in-ears. They're not doing. There's no like application. There's no tweaking the sound curve on these if you want to play around with that. The microphone sucks. I will say that. It's kind of miserable, but it supports aptX, AEC, SBC. They have not huge but decent size 5.8 millimeter graphene enhanced diaphragm, which essentially probably some sort of paper or plastic with graphite on it. They're really good, and you get 9 hours out of the earbuds alone on a full charge, and then another 36 hours charging is stored in the case. And I put the case in the pocket with my keys and just left it there. And I got to say, I'm super impressed with the performance on this. Wish it was USB-C instead of micro USB on the case on these. Apparently, I'm just going to do the entire review this week. But for $130, these are really impressive. I wish the mic was better, but you can always hold the phone up closer to your face when you're making a phone call. But super comfortable, 3 sets of tips. They're just sort of like little plugs that stick out of your ears. And I was super impressed with the sound. If you're doing things with background noise, they're pretty impressive. They knock down some of the background noise, but it's like, if I'm going to do my critical listening with my super cool guy hi-fi headphones, because, I have found a quiet place and anesthetized the children so they don't run screaming by in the middle of a particularly interesting piece. Haha, I would never do that. Sebastian would. these were just, I pulled them out of my pocket. I popped them in my ears. I didn't get tied up with cables. And I was just really impressed with the audio quality on these. Really, really impressive first step in earbuds from Cambridge Audio, wireless earbuds. Shocked. This is probably the first pair I've tried that just I really, really liked. And I think a huge part of that was just that the case was small enough where it would sit in my pocket and not be noticeable. And that made it much more interesting to me as something I could keep on myself constantly. And if I was like walking to the market or if I was in between things, I could just pop these in and listen. So props to Cambridge Audio. I have a couple of their amplifiers I've got to do reviews on, but that it's a conversation probably for a different show. So, Sebastian, big question this week. December 12th was the launch of Disney Plus. Did you subscribe?
I have not subscribed.
Really?
This is probably going to come as a shock, and you will be horrified. You sound like you're very positive on Disney Plus.
I was prepared to be really irritated by it. And they had some of the, what I will affectionately call perfectly normal. We just launched a giant video service to a rabidly enthusiastic clientele. So there were some glitches on the first day. There's some issues with the encoding on some of the cartoons, some people are saying. But what was fascinating for me, because on one hand, I'm not super stoked about everybody pulling their content behind yet another place for you to pay a monthly fee to access it. I'm finding that more and more maddening as more and more, studios or networks are like, we're just not going to let Netflix make all the money. We're going to start our own website. CBS, for example, I will probably never see a certain Star Wars show because I just refuse to pay CBS money because there's so little I want to watch on CBS. But this was kind of insane because you open up the DisneyPlus.com homepage and, it's right there. There's sort of big keyframes on the top, and then it's like Disney, Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars, National Geographic. And then just it's kind of terrifying to realize how much culture Disney owns at this point. Because you're sitting there like, oh, okay, they've got The Mandalorian, which is the new Star Wars series, which is maddening to me because they have released one episode. And I would like to binge watch all 12 instead of sleeping. But, Clone Wars is in here, Frozen, Avatar, of course, all the Pixar movies, all of the Marvel Studios movies, all of the Disney movies. It's a little, it's kind of unnerving how much content there is. I do also like the fact that they allow you to download a lot of the content as somebody who is traveling and don't want their kids, say, streaming the entire Phineas and Ferb library over and over again. That is a big plus. But actually, do they have Phineas and Ferb? Yes. Yes, they do. Oh, good. And they have at least 4 of the seasons. Well, fortunately, we own Phineas and Ferb on. Sorry, I haven't memorized like the entire layout of Phineas and Ferb. In any case, it's, I don't know. I'm fascinated by the amount of content they have. It's also frustrating, for example, if you are a Star Wars fan, because if you want to watch a bunch of the Star Wars stuff in 4K, or with certain audio advancements that are not otherwise available, you're going to have to stream it off of Disney Plus, and even really, really high quality streaming is still not as awesome as having it locally with full bandwidth on a Blu-ray. So we'll see. You are completely down on Disney Plus, mildly down on Disney Plus, or sort of down on Disney Plus?
Just it's kind of ambivalent, I guess.
Because you hate children?
No. Then here's the thing. My son, who just turned 4 recently, is not into any Disney property yet. So if that changes, if he suddenly becomes a huge Star Wars fan, it's not like I've kept Star Wars from him. I've sat down and watched Star Wars with him, and he just doesn't really care about it. So if if that changes and this is like the perfect solution to bring Disney content into the house,
right?
We'll subscribe to it. But right now, we have a library of Disney Blu-rays. My wife is a fan. It was part of her childhood, so we've bought those as they come out, and
right.
I think the original content part of Apple's TV service is what's really compelling about that, because there's no other way to get that stuff. And then I see something like this, and obviously there's going to be original content. I think that there are new shows, right? It's not just the digital library of movies and TV shows, right?
For example, the Mandalorian is one of the new shows that they're doing.
I'm not one of those people who's into the new stuff. Like Mandalorian, right? I like Star Wars. I don't like every single thing that comes out that's Star Wars. I'm very choosy. I'm a snob. I'm a Star Wars snob.
But this isn't like, this isn't the Terror of the Phantom Menace or Attack of the Clones or Revenge of the Sith, at least everything with the last 5 minutes of it. I don't know. It's I get it. I'm with you on that one. I partially had to check this out so I could talk about it on AVXL with Robert Heron. And it's also kind of fascinating to realize how much, because, there's the movies, there's the Clone Wars, there's the new Mandalorian, then there's a whole bunch of other cartoon series, and then there's the Lego crossovers. It's also kind of, one of those moments where it's like, I can't really let my kids have complete access to this because they'll just watch this till their eyeballs fall out of their face. Although it was interesting, especially while I was still seething about sort of Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, to realize that a lot of the Clone Wars stuff was, as a friend of mine said, where all of the real Star Wars writing talent went to hide during that stage, which is harsh and slightly snarky, but certainly fair. It's interesting. And it's also going to be in not too long in the future, one of the only ways you can get this content. Of course, Disney owns a big chunk of Hulu. There's existing deals out there. I was laughing because I was like, oh, this will be the place I can actually watch Tomorrowland. But it's you go to search, which is a Disney movie that everybody loves to hate, but it's like due to existing agreements, this title will be available on September 1st, 2021. Which I was just kind of like, so they don't even have all of their own content, which was kind of strange and fascinating to me.
By the way, did you see the stories about Star Wars, like A New Hope, where apparently the Han and Greedo scene on Disney Plus
has been extended?
Is another version entirely that nobody's ever seen before, that apparently Lucas had done when he still owned it, and it was going to be part of some 4K 3D re-release of the trilogy. And so now there's a new voice over Greedo saying something. It's longer. I have not watched it. I rolled my eyes at this point. It's like, oh, of course there's another version of the Han and Greedo scene in the cantina again. Of course, somebody else shouts something like Vader. No.
I will check that out, but I'll have to do it after my wife is asleep, because I think if she finds out there's one more recut of A New Hope, heads will roll. Possibly mine. Oh my goodness. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to This Week in Computer Hardware. In case you didn't know, we call it TWiCH. You can get all the older episodes and information on how to subscribe at twit.tv/TWiCH. The handsome man on the left is Sebastian Peak. If you're watching the video, that is PCPer.com's editor-in-chief, and I highly recommend you go to PCPer.com and read everything the man writes, because it is charming and well-researched. The mostly bald guy on the right, if you're watching the video, is Patrick Norton. That's me. You can find me on AVXL. We just started re-recording that. We have a couple episodes in the can. If you're a fan and a patron on that, it's avxl.com. It's a podcast about home theater and audio and screens and such. And let me tell you, going from a 100-inch projection screen to a tablet in an Airstream is something that needs to be rectified. So we'll talk about that.
Why would you do that to yourself. That is the ultimate sacrifice. I have a 100-inch screen in my living room. I bought it on Amazon. I grabbed a projector, and my wife is addicted to this. Like, it completely sold her on the idea of projection. So I don't think I'd ever be able to.
It was the Blu-ray of the BBC miniseries of A Pride and Prejudice that made my wife realize that the giant screen and the projector was okay. She was like, "Oh my God, I can see all the brocade in the fabric." I'm like, "Yep." You can finally see all the information on the disc. Yes. With that, ladies and gentlemen, oh my goodness, I'm Patrick Norton.
And I am Sebastian Peak.
We'll catch you next week on Twitch.